Hello and welcome to this video on validity. This is a topic covered in section 1.4 of our textbook. Validity is a concept that only applies to deductive arguments. Validity is basically another way of saying a well-reasoned deductive argument. So if you think of validity, think in terms of a deductive argument that is well-reasoned or very well-reasoned. That is a general way of understanding it. But there is a more technical definition, and I'll take that definition from straight from the textbook, from Hurley, 12th edition. A valid deductive argument is an argument in which it is impossible for the conclusion to be false, given that the premises are true. Another way to say this is that in a valid argument, if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. Here's an example. All Californians are people who live in the United States. All people who live in the United States are people who live in North America. Therefore, all Californians are people who live in North America. If we imagine this on a map, we put Californians inside the state of California as those people who live there. We know that that map of California has to be inside the United States. And we know that the map of the United States has to be inside the map of North America, right? The continent. And so it is going to necessarily follow that Californians are going to be a part of those people who live in the continent of North America. In other words, if those premises are true, which we know they're true in this case, it must be the case that Californians are people who live in North America. This is not hard to see because we know that these premises are true, and we know that the conclusion must follow that it has to be the case. But let's look at an argument in which the premises are just false. And this is actually a better way to understand the concept of validity. Here's the example. All Germans are people who live in Russia. All people who live in Russia are people who live in South America. Therefore, all Germans are people who live in South America. Okay, now remember the definition of validity. An argument is valid if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. Well, if we imagine these premises to be true, we see that the conclusion does have to follow. Look at the category of Germans here in this diagram. They have to be inside the category of the people who live in Russia. That's basically what the first premise says, by the way. And then that in turn has to be inside the people who live in South America. But notice that the conclusion, all Germans are people who live in South America, also follows because we see that Germans are inside the larger category of people who live in South America. In other words, if those premises are true, and what we've done by diagramming this, by the way, is we've represented it in such a way that they are true. We've imagined them to be true by diagramming it in this way. And then we see that the conclusion has to follow, and that is the conclusion that Germans are people who live in South America, right? All Germans are people who live in South America. Okay, let us look at invalid arguments. So by definition then, invalid arguments would have to be arguments in which the premises are true, but the conclusion is false, right? Because if valid arguments are defined as arguments in which if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. If that's what a valid argument is, then it logically follows that an invalid argument would be an argument in which the premises are true, but we have a false conclusion. So here's an example. All banks are financial institutions. Merrill Lynch is a financial institution. Therefore, Merrill Lynch is a bank. Now, this actually has, it's an invalid argument, so it actually has a false conclusion. For any of you who know about Merrill Lynch is not a bank. Merrill Lynch is an investment company. But the premises are true, right? It is true that banks are financial institutions. And it is true that Merrill Lynch is a financial institution because it's an investment company. But it is false that Merrill Lynch is a bank. Merrill Lynch is not a place that you can go and deposit your money and have a checking account. They only do investments. So we have a case in which the conclusion is actually false. The diagram I have here shows Merrill Lynch inside the category of financial institutions, and it also shows Merrill Lynch inside the category of banks. But the person who reasons this way makes a mistake by putting Merrill Lynch inside the category of banks. Why is that mistake made? Well, it is possible to diagram this in such a way in which Merrill Lynch is not inside the category of banks. And because that logical possibility exists, here it is, here we have it shown, because that logical possibility exists that Merrill Lynch is outside the category of banks, all the premises would still be true, right? Merrill Lynch would still be a financial, all banks are financial institutions would still be true, and this diagram here does represent that possibility. Merrill Lynch would still be a financial institution, and notice that Merrill Lynch is inside the category of financial institutions. And here we see that the conclusion is false. Here in this diagram we explicitly see that the conclusion is false, because we could have Merrill Lynch placed outside the category of banks with the conclusions being false and the premises being true. So the person who makes this argument, that is the argument that all banks are financial institutions, Merrill Lynch is a financial institution, and Merrill Lynch is a bank, has ignored this possibility right here, which shows us precisely why the conclusion is false, that Merrill Lynch is a bank. So this is it for our video on validity. Again, keep in mind that validity is just another way of saying a well-reasoned argument, but that there is a technical definition, and that is the definition that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. And also keep in mind that validity only applies to deductive arguments.